Ladies, gentlemen, and dragons of all ages, Dragon Age the Veilguard is now out and released to the public, and you can get it at any of the links down in our description, available on PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. And along with this, a lot of people are sort of digging their teeth in for the first time, some people just to this game, but for others this is their first experience with Dragon Age in general, as it's been 10 years since the last entry to the series. As such, there are some basics worth going over here, some familiar, some changed, but all extremely important for keeping both your character and your party at the power level that is expected to be along your journey. So today we'll be talking all about items and specifically equipment, how to make it stronger in the various ways, where to get stronger equipment, and how to interact with the systems that are designed around this purpose. And it's worth mentioning that while I will be focusing on the player character specifically in these examples, pretty much all of these things also apply to companions and their equipment as well, which is very important to keep up to date because companions are also very important to the combat in the game. First things first, we need to talk about the two ways of upgrading an item. There are rarity increases, which are the color swaps when an item turns from gray to green, and then green to blue, and then blue to purple, and there are also stat increases, which is when an item gets a +1 or +2, so on and so forth up to the higher numbers, and each time the actual raw stats on the item go up a little bit. Both of these are very important, but do substantially different things for you, and we'll start with the stat increases as it's the easiest to explain. Every weapon that drops in the game will have a damage stat that will also denote the damage type it does, as well as a stagger damage stat as well that more depends on the weapon type, axe versus sword versus hammer, and things like that. All armor will have a defense stat and an ability damage stat. These are inversely related to the armor class. Light armor has low defense and high ability damage bonuses, heavy armor has high defense and low ability damage bonuses. These are generally very similar numbers if you compare multiple armors from the same class. There are also belts and jewellery. Belts are related mostly to potions and healing, but can be affected by both types of upgrades we'll be talking about, and jewellery has more abstract bonuses, sometimes statistical, sometimes just boosting things like a specific type of ability, and unlike the rest of the equipment, you cannot get the +1 or +2 version of these, they just have rarity increases to unlock further affixes. Most equipment will also have little blurbs of text further down on them that are grayed out and have little lock symbols next to them, at least at the start. Don't worry about those quite yet, for now we want to focus on the actual numbers, the stats. If you find an item out in the wild, it has a chance to naturally spawn with a plus level beside it depending on your progression. If you do, it will simply be the same item as it would be without this plus level, but with a higher statistical value. You can also manually improve items that you enjoy using in this way, specifically at the Caretaker's Workshop in the Lighthouse once you unlock it around Chapter 3 of the story. This workshop lets you trade resources to gain these stat increases on equipment of your choosing. This workshop lets you trade resources to gain these stat increases to your equipment, and once you get the workshop itself to level 5 or above, you can even manually add enchantments to your gear, which are personally chosen and customizable stats to make your equipment even more unique and personal to what you want to achieve, not to mention that increasing the Caretaker's Workshop level increases the natural ranking that items will drop in the wild too, though all the upgrades that you do at the workshop are also limited in their own way. Not only are of course the resources that you use for this a bit of a limiting factor in themselves, but the shop itself can only upgrade items to a certain point depending on your workshop level. For this shop specifically, it is upgraded as you either find or purchase memento items out in the open world. These will just be laying on the floor sometimes, but most vendors in markets and such will also sell items labeled as mementos, as will the different faction shop vendors. If you buy these, you will gain Caretaker Power, and Caretaker Power is what decides when you are allowed to upgrade this specific shop. So if you want to keep your gear in tip-top shape, you should pick up and buy mementos whenever you can, though I'd be a little bit careful about spending too much gold on it at the markets, as gold has quite a few very important purposes. This is just one of the various ways to spend it to increase your power, and especially is ideal if you are certain that you found your specific favorite piece of equipment in a given slot and want to just keep it as upgraded as you physically can. Caretaker Power and mementos aren't really a farmable resource, though you could technically argue that you can farm gold to then spend on mementos in the vendor shops, but it is limited to your progression really, where there simply is just a maximum amount of Caretaker Power that you can have at any given time based on what you're allowed to access in the game. The best way to keep this close to its maximum though is just explore every given area that you can while you're going through the more linear pathways. Pay attention and notice if new pathways open up if you're coming to a city for the second or third time, for example, and then just buy up those mementos whenever you can afford to and whenever it makes sense for you. And for those wondering about gold and if there's ways to farm that, because it will come up a lot, there's no necessarily easy way to farm gold early in the game, but enemies do respawn if you load an area freshly through fast travel. So if you are insistent on being more powerful without making further story progress, that's generally the best way to do it early on, is to just frequently reload areas and kill the new enemies that spawn each time. Generally speaking though, the stat upgrades, the plus levels on the equipment, is sort of the icing on the cake. It matters, and especially deeper into the game it will matter even more, but it's far less impactful than the rarity increases on gear, the color changes. When an item goes from a gray item to a green item, one of the locked traits that was on it will become unlocked and activated, and they do also gain a bit of a numerical stat boost as well, just like the stat increase round upgrades do too. These can range from a variety of effects from bonus damage to health bars, bonus resource generation, bonus critical damage, bonus resistances to various types of damage, bonus ranged attack damage, bonus weak point damage. There are tons of different modifiers in these slots, and which one is best for you will absolutely be very particular to what you are trying to build, but it's the overarching connections that we're focusing on today here. This is all just to say that these rarity increases are extremely important to be aware of, and you do want to focus them on certain pieces of gear because they will have a lot of impact on defining the power of your character, so they're definitely worth paying attention to. That said, the next step is talking about how to get these rarity increases for the items that you want the upgrades for, and there are, for the most part, two ways. The first is from drops out in the world. If you have the same item drop a second time, take my skirmisher's round as an example. The first time that this dropped, it was a gray item with 2 locked traits. Then I found a second one and it upgraded to a green item with the first trait unlocked, and if I had found another one out in the wild, it would have naturally upgraded it to blue and unlocked the second trait. However, there is another way that this can happen with much less randomness and luck required, which is faction vendors. Every faction you meet throughout the story will have their own shop in their sort of hub area where you first meet them. You only get a few of these early in the story, but as you progress, you will meet more factions, find their hubs, and unlock their specific vendors. Each time you do, you should absolutely have a look at their stock. There are multiple pages of stock, so you don't want to miss out on doing this by only looking at the first page. These stocks don't really seem to change over time, so look at it when you get there and see if there's anything there that will interest you. What they sell is essentially an extra copy of various items, including companion items as well, related to the companion that faction holds. Like finding an extra copy of an item out in the wild, if you purchase one that you already have from a faction vendor, it will upgrade the one that you own to a higher rarity, like the full-on color change that unlocks the traits. Let's say that there was a shop that sold the upgrade to my skirmisher's round, and so I could use that to bring it from green rarity up to the blue rarity. These are generally relatively cheap if you have the required faction reputation level, but they do require gold, of course, as well as some other relatively common resources too that you'll just pick up along your travels. That said, not all items in a faction shop are available for purchase from the start, because the shop's inventory is directly tied to its faction level. You can see what will be in the rest of the inventory as you upgrade the faction level, but you cannot purchase it until you've upgraded it. And it sort of works like a reputation system. You have to manually upgrade this with each individual faction shop that you want to pursue, similar to the Caretaker's Workshop. These shops have their own progression, they do not sync progression, so you have to choose which one you want to upgrade at any given time, and it takes a fairly large amount of resources every time you do it. And even if you had infinite resources, you would still be walled by the faction reputation itself, because essentially this means that your choices matter a lot when doing this, and that you don't want to just upgrade every faction shop as soon as possible, or you may run out of the resources that you want to upgrade a shop that has a perfect item for you if you find it a bit later on. This isn't to say that you should avoid upgrading your shops or be afraid of it, but just to say that you should focus on upgrading one specific shop at a time that actually gets you to an item that you want in particular, rather than just sort of doing it on autopilot. That said, as far as faction reputation, there are two main ways of increasing this number if you want to upgrade any of the given faction shops. The first is by doing any sort of quests or activity for that related faction or in that area. This will just increase the faction reputation number pretty naturally. The second is by selling items to that faction's shop. The only places you can really sell items are faction shops, and there is an item type that is labeled as valuables that have one main purpose, which is to be sold. Selling to a faction's vendor raises their faction reputation, and so choosing where you sell your items actually does matter. On top of this, there are also some valuables in the game that will give you permanent stat increases when you get them. That's not overly related to this specific topic, but it's important to mention that while we're talking about valuables, and that you do want to pick those up whenever you see them. You get valuables in general just sort of naturally as drops during combat, partially during quests sometimes. So again, like gold, killing all of the enemies and fast traveling again to make things respawn is not a bad way to do this, especially because the other way to get valuables is like mementos. You can buy them from vendors with gold that exist around the world. These are most common in the larger cities that you gain access to pretty early on in the story, and these vendors will sell valuables, which does seem a little bit odd, but the reason for this is entirely the reputation system, letting you spend gold at a market vendor in exchange for these valuables, which you can then sell at a faction shop to gain reputation. And some of the gold back. The amount that you get back for gold definitely is not equivalent. You don't just essentially have free trading, you don't make the money back by any means, and while I was hoping it might be a thing, it does seem that the different faction shops do not offer different amounts of gold for the different valuables. So there's no like, buy a valuable from this city and then bring it to the faction in this city to get bonus reputation from them. It's just sell everything to the faction that you want to upgrade at any given point. These vendors offer a ton of goods though, and again, I just really want to reiterate that while you shouldn't automatically press the upgrade button without considering your resource supply, these vendors are extremely important to properly interact with and upgrade your gear from, depending on what you want at the moment. All in all, there is a ton of customization in this game. There's a lot that you can do to make yourself more powerful, and not only that, but also customize it in a way that is very personal to you. It may not be overly clear from the beginning, and the fact that pretty much all of this applies to companions and their equipment as well just adds a whole lot of depth to the potential for builds and the combat system in this game as a whole, which is personally one of my favorite parts of playing it so far, and so hopefully I can help you actually ease into it and understand the systems a bit easier when you first get your hands in it. I hope you've all enjoyed this then. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.